Hey everybody, welcome to another video. My name's Jack and I'm the Avid assistant. So I recently had a job where I was using Adobe Premiere, and in 10 plus years in post, this was the very first time I had ever touched Adobe Premiere. In fact, most Adobe software in general I've never really touched, not necessarily because I was actively avoiding it, just all of the jobs and the type of stuff that I do are normally scripted drama, and that's, you know, the whole market for that is primarily, mostly done on Avid. And so I've been primarily an Avid guy, as you may have guessed by the name of the channel. And so never really came across it. And I think as more time went on, I've kind of not really made much of an effort to learn it, because I was like, oh, well, what's the point? Clearly they don't need it. But yeah, I had a job on it recently, and it was an experience. You know, it was interesting. I've used sort of every other NLE except that one. And, you know, there was some things I liked. There was quite a few things that I didn't like. And some of that's just down to my own personal preferences. You know, I've used Avid so much for so many years that I'm sort of ingrained into the logic of how Avid works. You know, like I would instantly go to look for something and to do something in the Avid way. Whereas Premiere may have another way that might arguably even be more intuitive, but it just doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, that whole experience gave me an idea for a video, for another little editor's take.
And for that, we're going to be looking at some things that Media Composer is simply better at than Premiere. And we're going to be looking at some things that Premiere is simply better than Avid at.
And some of these you might see coming like a freight train. They might be really obvious. And some of them not so much. You know, so you can let me know as we go along and we get into it, whether you agree, whether you disagree. I've tried to stick with ones that I think are sort of unquestionably better on either side. As far as I can tell, I've not gone too controversial with this. But if you do disagree with any of these points, please do let me know, because, you know, I'd be keen to hear your argument on that side. Now, before I get started, I just wanted to say that probably something that a lot of people are going to assume that I'm going to talk about in terms of, you know, a major win of Avid over Premiere is project sharing. You know, bin locking, working on the same project at the same time. But that's actually not one of the points in Avid's win column. You may be surprised to know. Because Adobe Premiere has recently come out with their you know, production workflow, which is more or less the exact same thing. It basically involves multiple Premiere projects being able to be bin locked and used at the same time and shared by editors in almost the exact same way as how Avid Media Composer works. And with that, it's not quite at the level of stability that Avid is yet, but it's pretty damn close. At the job that I've been on recently, we've been using it without much problems at all. Pretty solid. So, although that's one of the things that Avid Media Composer is known for and has been for years, that's not one of the ones that it gets over Premiere in this run. No, actually, the first one I've got up for Avid is applying clip colors. Now, this may seem like such a mundane thing to many of you, especially if you don't really use clip coloring that much. Anybody who's really followed me on the channel knows that I really like clip coloring. But just look at how simple this is to do in Avid. You've got your color column in the bin up and available to you, and all you have to do is just right click anywhere in that and we can see all of these colors. It's great, right? It's really great. You know, it's really simple. You know, we've got a whole load of colors to choose from. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got like 24 colors here to choose from as presets, and then we can also just click here to use the OS color picker and choose any color we like. So we have a lot of options here, and it's really simple. And just from looking at the color that another clip was colored, we can quickly see what it is and then color something else the same by just matching the color here in the description. Very, very simple, very, very intuitive. Now, let's compare this to how Premiere does it. So here I've got a bunch of clips imported in Premiere. And you might think I could be able to just right click here, same as Avid, but no, we couldn't do that. Okay, that's fine, look elsewhere. Maybe if we right click the clip. So right click clip, and we get a big menu. And there's nothing that says color. There is something that says label. And then we can't see a preview of the colors. We just got all of these names. Names like Caribbean and lavender. Forests, I can assume forest is some kind of green, but a cerulean? I have genuinely no idea what color that is, or what Caribbean is, personally. And so this is just really unintuitive. Just show me the colors, just show me a preview. Even if the highlight of it changed to show that color as I move the mouse across would be useful. Because then I could compare the color to, you know, what it shows in the bin, and be able to match it. So say I had this color Caribbean, but I don't know all the names, I've not memorized what all the names are, then I want to color this clip here the same color as that. I've got to come right click and come to label again. Where is it? Down here. And then try and just guess which one of these is the same. Now, a logical person might assume that that is green. You know, or maybe it's that teal that we saw. You know, but no, that's teal just looks solid green to me. I can't quite see. But you get the point. It's really unintuitive. If you're going to be applying something color, then you're doing that for a visual reference. You're color coding it. So show me the color and not text so that I can visually associate them. That I just think is really dumb, especially year after year after year that hasn't been sorted yet, is mind-boggling to me. So there's a win for Avid on the scoreboard. Right, now getting into Premiere strengths, which depending on which side of the aisle you're coming at here, you may already be well familiar with, and we're going to showcase the ones here that are just absolutely undeniable. Starting with the obvious one, the ecosystem. So Avid has a few plugins, don't get me wrong, you know, and Script Sync is great, and Phrase Find is great, Symphony is very good, but it doesn't have anything that can even touch what Adobe has here in terms of this ecosystem. You know, in terms of all of these different apps here, like Audition, Animate, After Effects, huge one, you know, Lightroom, Dreamweaver, InDesign, Photoshop, really big one. And how well all of these apps play together, you know, and being able to open something quickly in After Effects and then use it almost instantly in Premiere right away. And all these apps, you know, you can tell that they're all made by the same person. You know, they all just talk to each other really, really well. Whereas Avid have owned both Media Composer and Pro Tools for years and years and years and years. But the workflow to get them to talk to each other has still been very manual and has involved trained assistants like myself in order to send the data back and forth. There's no option on your timeline to just go File, Output, Send to Pro Tools, you know, and then, you know, it just sends your entire timeline into a video reference and everything straight to Pro Tools. And the fact that they've owned both for so many years and it's not a thing is mind-boggling to me. As I say that, I can't give them too much slack because I know for a fact that this is a feature they're currently working on. It's a feature that they have got to work. So it's definitely something that's coming down the line in the near future. But even if Avid did have that and it worked perfectly, that's still only two applications talking to each other. And Adobe here, man, you just can't argue with all of that. It's fantastic. You know, the whole ecosystem of all of these different tools that are available to you with your subscription. And it's very clever on Adobe's part because you might subscribe for one of these, say Photoshop. You know, maybe you're tweaking graphics all the time, or you dabble a little bit in VFX, so you get After Effects. And so you've got a Creative Cloud subscription. Then why would you pay another subscription for something like Avid Media Composer when you've got an NLE right there in your current subscription? So you would just stick with Adobe. And they've probably got you onto other apps depending on which angle you're coming in at it from because of that whole ecosystem playing together so nicely there. So it's clever of them, it's worked very well, and hats off to them. It's very impressive. Now, the next way that Avid is just wholeheartedly better, you can't argue with this, is applying metadata to clips and sequences and showing that metadata as a burn-in. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So here in this sequence, I'll just find sequences I know what I'm talking about. It's this one. I've added my own custom metadata columns here by just right-clicking, add custom column. And I've got one for runtime, not duration, runtime, because I could use a different format and it's just clearer. Got the date, not date created because this is just a better format of writing the date. Version, I use dated versions, and edit stage is locked. Now I can create with the timecode generator a burn-in which will read any metadata that you can find in the bin, even custom ones that like the ones I've built here. So if I create any custom column I want, I can have a generator that reads that. So say if I was wanting to do labels on a project to, on a per shot basis to denote the status of each shot, I could create all these custom columns and then I would just type in the bin, what the change is. I wouldn't have to change anything on the timeline. It would just auto update. And one task that I actually use this method all the time for is ID boards, like this. You can see here for the treasurer, all this information that I've typed up here in my bin is being read live from the bin. And say if I was to tweak one of this, say I'll change the version to today's date. We'll go 2022 12/13. There you go. Version's been changed. And that's so much easier than opening a title effect, clicking in, changing it. And we could change the readout for countless different things very, very quickly in the bin without having to tinker with little things in the timeline and make sure they stay aligned to the bit the burn-in's meant to denote and stuff like that. And it's not just showing custom stuff either, like this timecode generator effect, we can read all kinds of metadata of the clip, frame counters, timeline clip notes that we've made across the timeline. I also think that's another solid one for Avid, but I'm not going to count that as one of the 5. And just all kinds of stuff. Any piece of metadata of a clip that you can think of, you can have burned in here very, very quickly and very, very easily. And you can save these as presets that you can just drag and drop on, and it'll read all that metadata. Whereas in Premiere, there isn't that option, I don't believe. So I've got a timeline here with some clips. And I can create burn-ins that will read, the timeline or the clip name or something like that, for example. But there is no way in Premiere for me to have it read custom metadata columns. In fact, go metadata display. So if we go to metadata display, I have been able to add my own custom column here. So I've just called it my data. Okay. Okay, I've created my own custom metadata column here in Premiere, but it doesn't seem to want to let me add data. It just calls it nan whenever I type anything in. Yeah, sorry. So after several minutes there of fiddling and looking around the menus, I can't find a way to add a burn-in that'll just represent my metadata that I've added in. And interestingly enough, there isn't necessarily a timecode generator counterpart. There is, burn-ins specific for clip name, for simple text and timecode, things like that. But I don't see one for showing that specific metadata, which just highlights yet another big W for Avid. Now, back to Premiere. The next major win that it puts on the score sheet here is actually to do with encoding. So, if we have our sequence here and we go File, Export Media, not only do we get a whole bunch of options here, we can go to any kind of different video format, resolution, encoding. And I will say I've downloaded the latest version onto my home system for this. And so it's Premiere 2022.2023. And they've fixed so many things because I'm using 2022, remoting into the studio that I'm working at. And they've fixed so many things in the most recent version. For example, it took me a solid 45 minutes in the old version to figure out that this here is where you saved it to, because it just said video file or something like that. And so I didn't know to click here would mean that would where you would choose where to save it. Whereas they've changed this whole window, made it look a lot nicer, and I've just added this simple word here called location, which just makes it much more intuitive that I would go there to click that and set where I'm saving it to. So well done, Adobe. You've made it a lot better. You've fixed a lot of things. But the most impressive part of their encoding of all of this is Media Encoder. You know, the fact that I can set my settings, say I want to go format as I'll do an H.264. I can hit down here, send to Media Encoder, and it's going to just throw my sequence over to a separate application, Media Encoder, for encoding and conversion to whatever the format is that I desire. And this can be opened as a separate standalone app, you know, much like, say, Apple's compressor, for example, for making masters and encodes, and we could queue off a bunch of different things. Say we're doing final deliverables and we need a WAV file of the sound, we need, you know, a ProRes, we need an H.264 for reference, we need this, we need that. We could queue this all up in Media Encoder and then hit go, and we could come back to Premiere and continue tinkering about in the project. I can even select a GPU acceleration, so if you have a decent GPU in your system, it's going to use that to get a much faster encode, whereas Avid pretty much only relies on the CPU. And I can even set it to shut down my computer once it's finished, so I could quite happily tick that, set my encode going, and then go away and go to sleep, leave it, and it'll shut my computer down when it's done, save me some energy, and I can check it in the morning, and everything will probably be done. So yeah, this is a huge win for Premiere. You know, and it's not something that's unique to Premiere. I did say before that Apple has compressor, and Final Cut 10 can use it in much the same way. You know, you'll do file, send to compressor, and then you can queue up all kinds of different codes and exports from there, start them going, and then come back to Final Cut. But it is something that Avid is sorely lacking. You know, and they don't necessarily need a separate app, even because Blackmagic doesn't have it with Resolve, but even theirs is just far superior. You know, the way that you can queue up all kinds of different exports and then just select them all and hit go, and it utilizes the GPU for acceleration as well, so it's just far faster. It's just a much better experience than Avid's just export, and then I've done X amount of time of the total estimated time, so the actual time remaining, Avid makes you do some maths to work that out. It's bonkers. Now, I will say that Avid used to have an option like this called Sorenson Squeeze. It wasn't made by them, it was a separate third party, but it had a lot of customization and pairing with Media Composer. So Avid could go files, send to Sorenson, and just send a sequence to them. And you could make all kinds of custom encodes, presets, and whatnot, and set it going in Sorenson and come back to your Media Composer. So sort of like exactly what Compressor and Media Encoder does, but they went into administration years ago, and the whole application of Sorenson and Sorenson Squeeze has just disappeared as of 2018, I think was when it finally died. Which is a real shame. I mean, I really remember at the time hoping that Avid would buy them out because they seemed so tight. For years I thought it was an Avid product, but it just never happened. And this is exactly the kind of thing that Avid needs in its toolbox, you know, to bring over, you know, some editors from Premiere and to keep editors happy come delivery time and making masters and things. Because otherwise you just end up waiting for a long time to then come back to Media Composer to set off the next one and then go away and wait a long time again. It's quite frustrating, especially since in Media Composer we can set off renders in the background and leave them going, and there'll be a queue, and then they will just get sent to the render queue in the background, and it'll use more or less of the CPU depending on what we're doing in Avid. We can do the same thing with transcodes, as you can see here. But why not exporting? I don't get it. Like we should be able to do the exact same thing with exporting. And I know we could export multiple different things, multiple different sequences at a time, but only to one export preset. We can't necessarily queue it to say, okay, you know, do these to ProRes, and then when you're done this, make a bunch of WAVs, and then when you're done this, make a bunch of H.264s, thoroughly check all your export presets, and then just hit go and walk away. That's the way it should work. That's the way it does work in other NLE systems. I don't get it, Avid. It's really something that, you know, you should sort out. Right, now the next one Avid Media Composer's got on the score sheet is backwards compatibility. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but if you're in any version of Avid, you know, and you want to open up a project that was made a good few years back, you know, from your archive, You could open up a project made 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, or probably longer. I haven't actually tested this, and I don't have a project old enough to really test it. The oldest one I've got here is Shadow in the Cloud. That was a film that I came on as a VFX editor for a while with Wera. That was really, really cool. Working with a really great editor, Tom Eagles, who's went on to very big and famous things. Go Tom. And it was definitely made on Avid 2018, so it was definitely made on a version of Avid that, in comparison to what I currently have in my system, is at least 4 years older. But if I go to open the project, let's see what happens. No, in fact, the project is just opened. And I've got all of my bins here. I can see all of my different footage. There's my Jack folder from back in the day. I can see all these different scenes. Even the script bins from ScriptSync is there. All my working bins. They're all there. Now, obviously, all this media will be offline because this was years ago. It was done at a facility, and I don't currently have a copy of the media. But had it not been, had I somehow kept a copy of the media, of the transcodes, all of this would just link up, and it would be here, fine, great. Now, to compare that to Adobe Premiere, and not just Adobe, Final Cut will do this as well. If you try and open a project from that was created in a previous version, then it'll kind of flip out and it'll ask you to upgrade said project to, Premiere 2022, 2023, like whatever the current iteration is that you're using. But then if you do that, you then won't be able to open that project again on the older system. Whereas if I am an Avid Media Composer here, I could have someone on Avid version 7 from years and years ago, before they even introduced the year, date, version, naming convention. And they could be running on the same project as me. We could be sharing bins, sharing the same project, back and forth, passing the project back and forth and opening it up, probably without too many issues. Obviously looking out for any caveats like, plugins we may have installed that are newer, or Titler Plus or something like that was a feature in Avid that was introduced later. But we'd still be able to open the bins and open the sequences, and we just wouldn't be able to play that effect. We wouldn't be able to render it. And if the effect was already rendered, even if it's a brand new effect that doesn't exist on the older system, then you'd be able to play the timeline because the rendered media would be there and it wouldn't matter. So backwards compatibility is a major, major one of Avid's strengths, and is another reason why it's sort of preferred for long form work. Because if you're on TV, you could call up a project from several seasons ago and then cut in your flashback, and you'd have the media, and you don't have to just use the masters. And you can communicate with different post houses and send bins and stuff back and forth each other. It doesn't matter which version of the software they're running. They could have a perpetual license for a certain version of Avid and just stay on that for years and years, and they could still keep working with you. So it's a really, really great feature that I kind of wish was adopted on a lot more software and hardware, not just in the film and TV industry, but everywhere really. Right, now here's one that you can't say that Avid is better. You just can't. Still images, right? So I'm just going to find the first still image that I can find here, right? So yeah, we'll just grab this Avid Assistant logo, right? And I'll throw this on the timeline. Oh, this came in really short. And then if I'm in Premiere, I can drag this out and along almost like as if it was an effect in Avid. I can make it whatever duration I want to, because it's a still image, and Premiere knows it's a still image. So if I want to trim it outward and longer, Premiere knows, okay, just repeat that image for every frame. Easy. Obviously, that's what he wants to do, right? Whereas in Avid, right, as I'm sure you know, but I'll show you anyway, if I have a still image. So I'll just, for the sake of comparison, I'll grab that same one. I'll just link to it to make it quicker. So here we have it here. And I will throw this on the timeline like so. If I try and drag this out, I hit a wall because Avid, in its infinite wisdom, when it's importing this, has given it a specific duration. It's made actual media and put it in Avid media files. So it's not live reading it, you know. Even though I've linked it in, I'm not actually creating new media in the Avid media files. Now, don't get me wrong, it works great as an alpha here, and I could drag it out and around, but it's very frustrating that I'm locked to a specific duration. And I'll give you one example where this is really annoying. Animation editing. Because at the very start of the project in animation, you're cutting storyboards, you know, so you're cutting with still images to build up the animatic of the film or the television episode or whatever the project is you're working with. Now, so long as we had ignored the alpha channel when we brought this in, so we sort of brought it in as media, then we have the option of applying respeed effects to sort of mitigate this issue. Like we can apply the trim to full effect on it, and then that'll allow us to basically sort of trim it out, stretch it as long as we want. And it's doing a retime on it, but because it's a still image, there's nothing really to retime. It's just extending it. But if you had to apply this effect to every single frame of your storyboard, it can get really frustrating putting this on all the time and relying on it to stretch it out. So it's just definitely a solid one, and that, you know, Premiere has in the Win column. I mean, it's one that I've noticed that a lot of Premiere editors, when they come over to Avid and they work in Avid, that they sort of struggle with. And even a lot of seasoned Avid editors still kind of struggle with this, and the way Avid handles still images, it can be a bit weird. I mean, I know the approved Avid way to bring in a still image is to use the Avid pan and zoom effect, and then within that, import the image. So say I can import that same image again, and you know, then with this method it sort of works similar to Premiere in the sense that I can stretch this out with no fixed duration as long as I like. I can, you know, move the image around, zoom in, you know, recenter, resize it, you know, tinker with it, whatever I like, as I should be able to, and, you know, change the duration to whatever I like. But having to import each storyboard frame individually through the pan and zoom effect would also be endlessly frustrating, and would take a lot of time, and you'd end up with just a crap ton of effects on your timeline needlessly. So although there's sort of workarounds like importing with a long set duration of the big media and stuff like that, Avid doesn't at present have a way to sort of compete, which is why Premiere does have a solid footing in the animation space, because for stuff like this, it's just way easier to bring material in very, very quickly and get to work. And stuff's changing all the time, so you need to be able to do that. Right, now this next one is one that actually surprised me that Avid Media Composer got the win here. And it's actually project saving, like saving the project. Because not only will Avid do this in the background, at least the several newest versions of Avid will, as you're working, you'll just get a little notification up here in the bin saying writing, but you can keep working and using the bin, going between other stuff as it saves in the background. But you've also got the Avid Attic, where Avid will periodically save versions of the bin, you know, and duplicate them, so it'll save all of those versions. So if you hadn't been, you know, doing things properly and you hadn't been duplicating your sequence, you could recover previous work from there. If you'd went too far down the wrong hole, or your system crashed mid-save and it ruined that save, you would have a save from not really that long ago. Premiere doesn't have that. In fact, Premiere, when you're working and the autosave kicks in, it will completely interrupt you and you'll have to wait until it's done. And since Premiere isn't compartmentalized data all around like Avid bins are, it's everything is loaded at the one time. So if you've got a big project, saving that will take a long time. So if that's regularly interrupting you to do that long save, it gets really annoying. Now, they tried to remedy this recently with their production workflow, where one is able to have multiple Premiere projects in the one production and have them all accessed and open at the same time. So say I could have a Premiere project for effects, one for music, you know, one for edits. I'm just throwing this together really quickly so you get the idea. And then it will only necessarily load what you're currently working in. Again, more similar to Avid, and we can see project locking and who's currently using it. It actually shows the user, the signed in user, rather than the machine name, which is a little more helpful. And we have this little green symbol here saying that I have it open. We get like a red cross if someone else had it open. And so I could close one of these and then open a different one. And this would help with our saving issue, but I've noticed that even if it's one project that just has a bunch of media in it, say a whole bunch of clips, it doesn't even have any edits in it yet, it still takes a really long time to save when Premiere does that interruption. And it's just definitely one that I have to give the win to Avid for, because Premiere still has a lot of work to do in that regard in terms of streamlining the data and the code of their projects and also background saving. You know, not to say that I want it to wholly just save discreetly in the background, similar to how Final Cut 10 does it. I don't trust saving that I don't have manual control over. I definitely prefer, of all the NLEs, Avid's way of saving. You know, I'll just make a little change here. I can wait for it to do its background save, which I'll set the duration to every how often how it does it. Or I can just hit Command S at any time, Control S on Windows, and you can see it do the save. And then I know I can relax mentally. I know it's been done, and we're all good. So yeah, that's definitely another one there to Team Purple. Well done, Aaron. Now, this next one, that spoiler alert is going to Premiere, isn't really an advantage unique to Premiere. It's one that every other NLE seems to have, whether you're Final Cut, Resolve, Premiere. They all have much better plugin support than Avid Media Composer does. You know, so if I search here, if I go Premiere plugins, there is a laundry list of options here, right? Ranging from codecs, file formats, audio, titling, workflow tools, all kinds of effect stuff, and like a lot of it really, really cool, quite advanced stuff. There's a lot of free ones as well. You know, Effects Factory's got a bunch of free ones. They've got their own marketplace and stuff that you've got all kinds of pan and zoom and cool workflow effects. But it's not all just effect stuff. You know, there's a really, really great plugin called Watchtower. And what Watchtower does is you can set watch folders and it'll just bring in any media that you put there, bring it into Premiere. It can sort it for you, put it in a designated place. It can auto sync with certain bins and folders. It's a really, really neat plugin that helps a lot with workflows and would save assistant editors a lot of time. And it's very inexpensive. Yeah, see, like $25, and that's not a subscription. That's just a license to use it. And there is just an endless list of these plugins. If you just Google Premiere Pro plugin, there are so many different options, and there's even articles written just about the best ones and favorite ones, and there'll be YouTube videos on people's preferences and then highlighting all kinds of different plugins of stuff that Premiere can do. And this is the sort of support you get when you open up your application to the wider market, to smaller developers and you know, single individual people developers who just have great ideas and they can make stuff for your NLE. Now compare this to Avid, where they use AVX plugins, which are predominantly only useful for effects. And don't get me wrong, effects plugins are great. I'd love to see more of them in Avid. And I don't just mean the ones made by Boris FX, which are very, very good, don't get me wrong, but they're also quite expensive. You know, it's not far off what I pay for my full annual Avid license, what you could pay for one of their packages. But they're kind of one of the only guys around doing plugins for Avid. Now, of course, there are, you know, the guys from FX Home who do the Ignite plugins, and there's New Blue as well that make a whole bunch of different plugins for Avid, as well as other NLEs. But again, these tend to be expensive, regular subscriptions, as opposed to quick and dirty things that you can download and try on your home system. Don't get me wrong, part of this is purposeful. Avid is deliberately not going after, sort of YouTuber or creative market. They don't want people like me making YouTube videos, editing them on Avid Media Composer. That's not the market they're after. And, I know a couple of you have maybe disagreed with me in the comments about this, saying stuff like they're not doing it on purpose. They'd love to have part of that market. Of course they would. It's just, they don't appeal to that. Nobody wants it. Now, I disagree. Now, if you look at some of the marketing decisions around Avid, it's all based around the tools that Hollywood professionals use, and the type of business acquisitions that they make, and development tools that they come out. They spend all this R&D time, and they come out with stuff like Interplay, and they come out with stuff like Media Central, and Nexus Edge, which are all terrific systems, but they cost a fortune, and so they're only going to be bought by big productions or post facilities, studios, people who can afford that kind of thing and can offer it to people who work for them. Whereas Adobe buys something like Frame.io, which is something I was genuinely praying Avid were going to buy. It may not be as powerful as Interplay or Media Central for video review, but gosh darn, it's great. It's really, really great. Now, I've cut an entire feature film without ever having met the directors on it, because we did the entire thing through Frame.io. And looked at all of our reviews were done there. And it's cheaper, like not really much of a subscription. And now you get it with your Creative Cloud license because Adobe bought them out. That would have been a great thing to bundle with Avid and make your review tools more accessible, and not just to those who can buy the big packages. But yeah, getting off track here. That's just one example of how Avid's clearly only going after the professional long-form market, because that's what they're good at, that's what they know, that's where they kind of dominate, that's where they're king. And it works for them. And that's part of the reason why, I'm guessing here, they're not fussed about opening up the software to anyone to make plugins for, and to make availability, lots and lots of cheap plugins, because it might devalue their own tools or those from Boris or whatnot, of the more high caliber professional tools. But it's a real shame, because even if someone was to be very determined and start writing their own plugins for Avid at the moment, the best that they could do would be to make some effects, or maybe an AMA plugin to help with ingesting a little bit. And there are some of those, like the Nablet one's quite nice. But compare that to Blackmagic or Premiere, where you can make plugins to do all kinds of things, to ingesting, transcoding, messing with the interface, anything. It's just really, really useful. I've seen animation studios completely customize, NLEs with their own in-house made tools very easily. But those R&D departments hate Avid because they can't do it to them. So even though Avid might be doing some of this on purpose, definitely giving the win to Premiere and every other NLE for plugin support. Right, now another one here that is just definitely, I think, a hands down winner for Avid Media Composer is exporting the timeline. And I don't necessarily mean exporting to make a video file or a movie file like a MOV or MP4 or something like that. I mean exporting the timeline for relink, online, or relinking in another NLE. So say, for example, the most common one I'd be doing is exporting my locked timeline in Avid to be relinked somewhere like DaVinci Resolve. So there's multiple different options that I have available to me, with the most common one, say, being an AAF. And the options that I get in terms of an AAF are many. I can copy media, I can set whether to link to the media or copy it or consolidate it with a certain number of handles, or I can set to just deliver a video mixdown with my AAF as a reference. If I do any of those options, I get the option of what I want to transcode it to, how I want to deliver the media, whether it's set next to the AAF or whether it's embedded in it. I can export the audio this way as well, convert it to different formats on export, set which tracks I'm exporting, all kinds of options for the AAF. But AAF isn't my only option. I've also got Avid's list tool, where I can export EDL in a whole variety of different formats, In each one of these formats, I can set all kinds of data which can go into the EDL. I can preview what it will look like. I can set which tracks that are included in that EDL, you know, whether I just want one track or all of them, or certain specific ones. Say I want just the video, I can load that. I'll get a live preview of what my EDL will look like when it's exported, so I can quickly do tests, which is very, very handy. So I can see here, you know, standard file 129 EDL with all my time codes and my clip names and the source name. You know, that will work quite well. I can include data on the effects that were used, for example, if I wanted to, where there's dissolves or, you know, segment effects, other AVX effects, and then just hit update, and I see all the changes. So you'll see here, an AVX effect is used, a 3D warp. You know, we can apply a lot of metadata here into our EDLs, and this is used all the time in so many different workflows in order to make spreadsheets and to track data, and especially even in animation and VFX workflows where you're in like a big studio. You know, their R&D departments will make their own custom tools, and EDLs are just a really, really simple format way for them to get data out of the NLE into their own R&D made tools, and then for them to do other things with it, like update Shotgun and various other platforms with tracking metadata. So this is really, really useful. I have my timeline and I want to export an EDL. I can go export EDL and I get a little bit of options. Like I can choose some tracks to export, can't necessarily choose all of them, and I can tick one of these. But I can't choose between all the different variations of an EDL, like file 32 or 129 or tab list or all those other ones. I'm stuck sort of with the CMX 3600 EDL here, and I don't get a preview of it or what it looked like. I would need to just export, view it, tinker, come back to Premiere, and keep trying. And if I wanted to export an AAF, don't get me wrong, we get a decent amount of customization here. Like we can mix down the video and include a mix down of it. Tape sources, which I don't see why you wouldn't want that. And we only get these options here of embedding the audio if we say breakout to mono. But if it was stereo audio, we wouldn't want to do that. We'd want to keep it as stereo, but we might still want to convert it. We don't get a lot of options here, basically, is what I'm saying to you. Sure, you can export an AAF, and we can also export an XML here, Final Cut XML, which, you know, Avid doesn't really do. I mean, there's an XML option there in the list tool, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's not really useful for much. But Avid's options for exporting out metadata, like AAFs and EDLs and all the rest of it, are just plain superior, with a lot more options and a lot more reliability. For example, if I export an AAF from Avid into Resolve, I can even see in Resolve not only my effects been rebuilt as I had made them in Avid, but I can see the Avid markers that I put on the timeline get brought through and put into Resolve as markers there. So this is definitely just one of Avid's strengths, something that it's very good at and it's honed over the years. Right, now this next one is kind of, you know, a bit controversial, a bit up for debate. You know, which I know I said I was going to try and avoid, but, you know, screw it, here we are. And it's ingesting. It's bringing in material. Now, in Premiere, you can throw in pretty much anything you can think of. You can throw it straight into the project. You know, I can do my Command I and import whatever I like, whether that be still images of various formats, movie files. Hell, I can even just drag and drop stuff straight from the Finder, and it'll import it straight into the bin. Like that. This is a video I made for Patreon, by the way, where I fully showed off my entire Avid setup and explained all of my purchasing decisions and how everything goes together. So if you're interested in that, you know, maybe take a look at the Patreon page and consider subscribing. Now, you saw how easy it was to bring all that stuff in. Whereas if you compare this with Media Composer, you know, when I was making my A100 series, I had 2 whole half-hour videos on ingesting media because it's such a complex topic. You know, once we bring our material in, it's strongly advised that you transcode it. You know, we can't just set it to make proxies and things. We talked a lot about this in the proxy workflow video. You know, everything's just it's very manual. It kind of relies on you being more trained in both Avid Media Composer and in media codecs and file formats and stuff like that. You sort of have to know what you're doing a bit more for ingesting in Avid and keeping everything the way you want it. Whereas in Premiere, you can just sort of throw everything at it and Premiere will accept it and ingest it. Now, that may, to a lot of people, seem like a benefit and a clear, solid win to Premiere, but I'm going to put it more in the sort of controversial column because you know, with those two options, even at the outset, I would have preferred Avid. I like having control over my projects. I like knowing exactly where everything is. You know, I don't like software doing stuff for me. Pretty sure I'm on the record as saying that in earlier videos. I like to be the one in control. I want to be in the driver's seat. I want to be controlling everything. So, you know, knowing all of those codec formats and what I'm transcoding to and when and what color space it is, and having to know all that in order to get it in, and then having it all in the Avid Media Files folder, and that Avid Media Files folder working well when I maintain it. I like all that. It keeps the project running well and running smoothly. You know, and it means that you sort of have to be trained in the software to use it and to know what you're doing, which I personally think is ideal. Whereas in Premiere, sort of anyone can pick it up and get going, which again isn't inherently a bad thing. You know, it makes it very, very versatile for YouTube cutting, for short films, for entry level sort of thing, for anyone who hasn't used any NLE at all. This is sort of more intuitive and easier to get to grasp with and to start. But I have seen it on a number of occasions leading to big issues with the NLE, with crashing and slowdowns, because I've seen directors, even big directors that should know what they're doing, just dragging and dropping like red raw files in there, you know, ARRI raw files, like hours worth of raw files, and just expecting to play with it and chop it up and work it, because they don't really understand transcoding or, you know, NLE friendly codecs and things like that. And I think, you know, that method of importing, of making it that simple, does kind of encourage that behavior a little bit, you know, because it's so simple. But, you know, there's pros and cons is what I'm trying to say to you. It depends on your workflow. And again, it kind of highlights the sort of market that Avid is tailored to, what it's going for. It is for long form, professional, larger work. You know, it's where Avid excels, it's where it's really stable if you know what you're doing and you're using it properly in its workflows. Whereas if you tried to cut YouTube videos or quick short films or quick web content on Avid, you know, you're not going to have access to all those awesome plugins that Premiere's got, and you're going to have to spend a little good bit of time doing all that media management on top of all your quick turnaround editing as well. So it just might not make sense to use Avid Media Composer, even just for that reason. Right, guys, but now our scoreboard is even of 5 on 5. I know that last one we did say was controversial, but we're going to give it to Premiere for the sake of the video. It's time to wrap it up and chat about where we landed. You know, we know that both pieces of software have their strengths. We know that Premiere is definitely a lot easier to get into, I would say, if you're a newcomer to editing, both in terms of being cheaper and you're getting access to more other software. And, you know, there's a good chance that a lot of people have used Adobe products in the past as well. They'll already be familiar with that sort of Adobe Logic. I wasn't, but I know a lot of people are. So it's definitely more, you know, accessible as software. But I do find Avid to be much more stable for larger projects. For me, it crashes a lot less. It can go, you know, backwards compatible between versions, quite friendly. It's a reliable tool of the trade. So I don't see either one of them beating out the other anytime soon. I think they're going to both continue to coexist quite happily with each other for a good long while going forward. With Adobe, you know, regularly clipping at Avid's heels and you know, trying to get more into that long form space, as they're doing with their production workflow and bin locking and everything else. As they should do, because, you know, Avid dominated that space for too long, particularly after Final Cut 7 died. And they really, really need that competition in order to drive them to better and greater heights. So, you know, fully welcome that from Adobe, and they're doing a really good job. But that's me and my say. So is there anything that I've said in the video on either Premiere or Avid that you disagree with? You can let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know whether you're, Team Purple or Team Blue, Navy, I'd say it's kind of like navy blue. Whether you're team navy blue. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. What part of the industry you come from, which NLE you primarily use. I'm primarily scripted content, scripted drama, films, films and TV, but always scripted long form content. And I've always been Avid. I've met assistant editors and editors who have always been Premiere. And I know plenty of people who regularly go back and forth between the two. It depends on a lot of things, Sometimes the production will mandate which one you use. Sometimes it depends what industry you're in, like what part of the industry you're in, what type of project you're doing. So like animation, or even some ad content, commercials. There's a good chance you might be using Adobe there. So, let me know your experiences. I'd be quite keen to hear it. But until then, this has been a long night. It is now 10 to 2 in the morning. So I am going to go and get some sleep because my wife's messaged me several times telling me to hurry up and go to bed. But thank you very much for watching, guys. And for now, I will bid you good night, and I'll see you in the next video. See you later.